Hi, my name is Elizabeth Stewart. I am a NCCP trained coach in the sport of Adult Triathlon. I'm also a coach with the Guelph Triathlon Club here in Guelph, Ontario. And I also have completed my studies at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition and have done a significant amount of self-study since on sports nutrition and trying to merge natural nutrition with sports nutrition. I often get members of our club asking questions about what to eat, and right now in the last week I have had one member who's currently training for a full Ironman asking me specifically how he would calculate how many calories he needs to take in order to complete his Ironman race. So after a few emails back and forth, we kind of figured it out, but then thought that maybe this would be information that would be helpful to share with the rest of our triathlon club members, and hence the video today. And of course, if there's anyone else out there outside of the Guelph Triathlon Club who is training for a triathlon, feel free to watch this video. Of course, all triathletes are welcome to take in the information that I'm about to share with you today. So before we get started, I do want to talk about a few concepts before we get into any specific calculations. And before I even get into those concepts, I actually just want to share a minute of a video clip from another YouTube video by Ironman, and it's a pretty famous clip of a pretty famous triathlon finish. So hopefully this will come in clearly enough for you to kind of get a glimpse of what happened here.
After more than 140 miles, it's come down to less than 100 feet to that damn line. Just yards behind, her stalker appears. It's Wendy Ingram.
So in that video, what we just saw were two ladies that were crawling to the finish line of their Ironman race. And they were actually fortunate because they were able to crawl across the finish line of their race and complete the race. But this has happened to other athletes where this situation has happened to them a kilometer or 2 kilometers or more out from the finish line, where it is absolutely impossible for them to finish their race because they are essentially what's called bonking, running out of energy. To me, that's absolutely heartbreaking, because I know the amount of effort that it takes for these athletes to train and prepare for a race like a half Ironman or an Ironman, and it's certainly something that I want to help you avoid from happening to you. So race nutrition, during race nutrition is so important, and that's what we're about to talk about today. So our ultimate goal with today's talk is to be able to calculate the number of calories that you need to take in, so the amount of food that you need to take in during your race. That's our ultimate goal. So we're going to calculate in calories for you, on giving you an example of how to do those calculations so that you can calculate how many calories you will need to cross the finish line standing tall and strong and running across and not crawling. So we'll take about 15 minutes to get to the end of the talk. So if you want to go and grab yourself a tea, or maybe a glass of one of my favorites, some coconut water, and just put the video on pause while you get that, and then settle back into your seat with your favorite bevy, then we can continue on. Otherwise, if you're good, we'll move ahead. So a few concepts that I just want to cover off. before we get into the actual calculations. Got to flip to the start of my page. I've borrowed my son's painting book here. So first terminology is just bonking. So what we just viewed in that video, those ladies were essentially running out of energy, and not were they just running out of energy, they were specifically running out of glycogen. Very, very important thing to be aware of is glycogen. So they ran out of energy, something I don't want to have happen to you. Second concept that I want to talk about is just our fuel sources. So we do have 3 potential fuel sources. Our most important fuel source is from carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are an endurance athlete's best friend. Endurance athletes should not be even contemplating a low-carb diet. You absolutely need carbs to fuel your training and fuel your race. So carbohydrates, when you eat them, they are broken down through digestion. They enter your bloodstream as glucose, and what you don't need right away as an immediate energy source is stored as glycogen. Where are we? Glucose, carbs, broken down to glucose. What you don't need right away as energy will be stored as glycogen, which is a relatively readily available energy source that's stored in your muscles. And if your glycogen stores are all filled up to the top already, then anything excess would be stored as fat, which brings us to our second energy source is fat. So in any type of exercise, movement that you're doing that your body needs energy for, it will be using a combination of carbohydrates or blood glucose and fat. Very rarely will your body use muscle, but in extreme situations like the one that we just watched, your body would be going into a very catabolic breakdown mode, releasing lots of stress hormones, breaking down basically any tissue that you have in your body, including muscle, to try to fuel your body. So, but it is a situation that we want to avoid. We want to preserve our muscle. We don't want it to break down. Our muscle is what's going to power us forward in our race. So our next little concept that we would just want to talk about before moving on to the calculations is limited storage capacity. So we have an unlimited amount of capacity to store fat. You could add layer and layer and layer upon fat. Of course, as an athlete, we don't want to be layering on fat. We want to be shedding pounds and excess fat in order to perform optimally. So when we're talking about performance sports and storage capacity of energy, what we're mostly concerned about is our capacity to store glycogen, and this is going to be very individual. It's actually based on muscle mass, specifically skeletal muscle mass, and your skeletal muscles are attached to your skeleton, and it's the muscles that help you move and move forward during your race. So how convenient is it that we have evolved to be able to store glycogen in our skeletal muscles for when we need it. So it's about 36 calories worth of energy per pound of skeletal muscle that an individual will be able to store as glycogen. And lastly, there was one little thing that I wanted to mention here. Very important to note as well. So why were those ladies bonking? They have an unlimited amount of fat storage, but why were they just collapsing? And that reason being is because in the absence of glycogen and blood glucose, your body cannot metabolize fat as an energy source. So you will just absolutely collapse and your body will quit, because your body actually needs to use a little bit of glucose in order to release the fat and process it to a point where your body can use it as energy. And lastly, intensity. Intensity is important when we're doing this calculation because the intensity of our workout will impact the overall mixture, composition of energy that we're using. And the composition that we're talking about is the composition of fat as fuel versus blood glucose as fuel. So the higher the intensity, the more your body will rely on a higher proportion of glucose, blood glucose for energy, and a lower proportion of stored fat. And usually when we're racing, we're at a higher intensity. We want to cross the finish line as well ahead as anyone else as we can, or reach our personal goals. So chances are we're going to be working at a higher intensity, therefore burning through a higher proportion of glycogen versus our stored body fat to get us through that race. So those are just some concepts that I wanted to take you through, and now we can get into the actual calculations. So how much energy do you need, or how much do you need to eat? So ultimately we're trying to find out in calories how much you need to take in order to get you across the finish line. So, and not just to get across the finish line, but to get across the finish line with optimal performance. I don't want you crawling, I don't want you walking, I don't want you feeling exhausted when you're walking or running past the finish line. I want you to make it look like it was easy for you. So everybody else that's watching the race says, wow, look at that person. Like, that looks so easy for them to cross the finish line. You still have energy to go do your finisher photos, stand on the podium, and go do all that fun stuff that's fun to do after a race. So calculations, there's three things, first of all, that we need to estimate before we get into the final calculation. First, we need to estimate how many calories you will burn through each segment of your race, your swim, your bike, your run. And we will also need to estimate your specific glycogen storage capacity. And we will also need to estimate approximately what level of intensity you plan to race at. And then therefore that will determine what percentage of body fat will be used as fuel and what amount will then need to be taken in as fuel while you're racing. So I'm actually going to use myself as an example here. So I'm preparing for a half Ironman, Ironman 70.3. I'm doing Muskoka 70.3 in July. It's actually my first half Ironman, and up to this point I've focused mostly on sprint triathlon. So fueling during a race hasn't been as important to me as it is going to be for this particular race. So I'm going to use myself as an example and this distance as an example, but you can absolutely follow the same calculations for any race distance, but this becomes mostly important for longer endurance triathlons, so probably starting with Olympic, where in-race nutrition becomes important, and then definitely a half Ironman, and beyond that into Ultraman. So some things that I need to know about myself before I start to do these estimations, which I will be using mostly with some online calculators that I'll tell you about in a bit. But so I know that what my goal race is. I know what the distances of this race is going to be in terms of my swim, my bike, my run. I know that I'm female, I'm 40, I'm 112 pounds, and I also know my maximum heart rate. If you don't yet know your maximum heart rate, this is something that you'll probably want to determine. Very important to know in your training. A very powerful training tool is to train by your heart rate. So if you don't know what your maximum heart rate yet is, I definitely recommend you to Google ramp test, R-A-M-P test, ramp test, and perform a ramp test on your bike or your run, or better yet, both. The standard calculation of 220 minus your age is a medical kind of invented calculation tool that medical professionals use to quickly determine if somebody's heart rate is, really out of a normal range, but in terms of sports and performance, it's not a accurate, useful tool at all. It is something that needs to be determined, not calculated through a generalization. So I know my maximum heart rate, and from there I can calculate my target heart rate. So in my race, I know that I'm going to be mostly in tempo or sub-threshold for the majority of my race, which is about 75 to 80% of my max heart rate. So, and you actually can ignore that VO2 max. You actually don't need to know that for anything that we're going to do today. So number one, calculating total energy. So you'll want to look at your swim, your bike, your run. I have noted a few tools here, online tools. So nutritionstrategy.com is what I used for calculating or estimating the calories that I would use during my swim. And that it was kind of a graph that gave approximate number of calories on, for various weights of people, based on different body weights and how many calories per hour. So I know that I want to finish mine in 38 minutes. So I just did a calculation to take that number of calories per hour to figure out what it would be for 38 minutes. For my bike, I used mapmyride.com. They had a tool there that actually plugged in a ton of information, including my distance, my estimated finishing time, my age, my gender, and it gave me a value of 2,229 calories that I will need in order to get through my bike ride. And then lastly, on my run, I used runnersworld.com / tools, and in there I was able to get an estimation for how many calories I would need during my run. So those are the tools that I used. You can play around, Google them online. There's tons of different tools. You can always try 2 or 3 of them and see if you get similar numbers across them all. But in the end, you're going to come up with a pretty good estimation of the number of calories that you'll need to complete your race. So for me, the number of calories that I need, 3,640 calories. That's actually equivalent to a full pound of body fat. Did you know that? But yeah, that's a lot of calories that I'm gonna need. All right, so the second thing that I need to estimate is my stored glycogen. How much energy can I actually store in my muscles? So for me, I know that it's 36 calories per pound. I weigh 112 pounds, and about 30 to 40% is the generalization for the approximate proportion of weight that will be skeletal muscles. So I imagine that 40% would probably be like a really muscular, lean male, where 30% might be, someone who's not as lean, or a female tends to have a bit higher proportion body fat. I feel like I'm pretty lean, but I'm not bulky, so I'm gonna put myself maybe at 35. So 35% of my muscle, or my overall body weight, is lean skeletal muscle, and times 36, and I get that I can hold 1,260 calories worth of energy in my glycogen stores. Now, also in some research, some literature, I came across this kind of average as, the average person can hold approximately 350 to 500 grams of glycogen, which would equate to 1,400 to 2,000 calories worth of energy. Mine's a little bit lower than the low end of the scale, but I know that I'm a small person, so logically I'm thinking, okay, that probably makes sense. I'm pretty comfortable with 1,260 being what I've calculated. So the last thing that we want to estimate is the percent of fat stores that will be used to fuel my race versus glycogen. So for that I used Shape Sense. Again, there was a thing there where I typed in my my heart rate target for my race as well as my age. Now this one, again, it automatically calculated my maximum heart rate based on the 220 minus my age. So I did have to age correct. I actually put myself to a 34-year-old because I know my maximum heart rate is actually more equivalent to a 34-year-old if I'm using the 220 minus my age calculation. So maybe I'm younger than what I actually am in my real age, and my fitness is keeping me young, I guess. Okay, so those are the things that I need to estimate. So my final math then looks like this. I know that it's going to take me 3,640 calories to get me across the finish line. I know that I will store up to 1,260 calories worth of energy in my glycogen stores, but I'm only wanting to use about 0.6 of that. I don't want to deplete my glycogen entirely on my race. Now, there isn't really any kind of definitive study to show at what point of glycogen depletion does performance actually start to decline dramatically, but I don't want to take any chances. Absolutely, performance will start to decline. Your body will physiologically, will have a physiological response to your glycogen stores getting lower, and you will start to feel more fatigue set in the lower and lower and lower that your tank gets. So I don't want to risk going any lower than about 40% so that I'm crossing the finish line strong. And just as extra insurance that, I'm not going to collapse 100 feet out from the finish line. So I'm taking my glycogen stores, I'm times 0.6 because that's all that I want to tap into during my race. And then I've also calculated based on that calculated before, based on the intensity that I plan to race on, that it'll be about 20% of my fuel will be fueled by fat. So that's 728 calories worth, which gives me my grand total of 2,156 calories that I will need to take in during my race in order to get me across the finish line, standing tall with still energy to go and celebrate afterwards. So just a few things that I want to close with. First, this is an estimation only. Everybody's very different metabolically. Diet can impact your metabolism and how you metabolize, and just different ways of training can also train your body to tap into a higher proportion of fat as energy. So, so that is a starting point. Absolutely practicing your nutrition during practice training sessions, and doing some fine tuning, doing a race, seeing how you felt. You know, were you feeling a little bit low energy? You're starting to really kind of feel sluggish during the last 5 kilometers of the run. If so, maybe, you know, an extra tablespoon of honey is all that you needed to get you across feeling a little bit more, feeling a bit stronger. So, so once you start, that's kind of your starting point, and then with experience, you're continuously optimizing and trying to really fine tune what is best for you. Secondly, that just gave you how much you need to eat to get across the finish line. We did not at all talk about what to eat or when, which brings me to my last wrap-up point, is to please subscribe to this YouTube channel, Guelph Triathlon Club, because this is intended to be just the first of a series of videos that will talk about nutrition for triathletes. And in a video that follows in a week or so from now, I will be specifically talking about things that you can eat, what to eat, and when to eat it in your race. So thank you very much. Hope to see you again, and good luck with your training.